the train, all alone at dawn, back into the hole where I was born. The sun in the sky never raised an eye to me. There's blood on the tracks, they must be mine. The fool on the hill, but I feel fine. Don't look back, 'cause you know what you might see. All my people right here, right now, do you know what I mean? Ladies and gentlemen, we are floating in Screamacelica. My name is Russell Boyce, and probably the only time you'll ever hear me able to introduce my guest as Paul John Dykes. Paul, how you getting on, stepping in for Big Kev tonight? Thank you very much, mate.
Big boots to fill, Russell Boyce. Not just his boots, but the partnership. It's a big partnership, and I'm going to have to apologise in advance to everybody who's tuning in to watch the gruesome twosome. I just need to know my place tonight, because when you started the lyrics there, it takes me back. I mean, that single, I might not talk about Oasis in the same kind of revered tones as yourself from time to time, but they were so important to me in the 1990s, Russell. That band were so important. And I just remember back in the day, some people might find this absurd, looking back it maybe was, I remember queuing up for that single in our price in Dunfermline, queuing up for Do You Know What I Mean? And that's how much you invested in a band, you know what I mean? It was the day of release, and you wanted to buy. And back then, the good thing about buying Oasis singles was the B-sides. I know. Another funny story with that song was at one of the pubs in Bridgevale, and I was too young at the time, obviously, but one of the punters in my pub told me that, he says, see that day it went on MTV for the first time? He goes, it was like a Monday. He goes, and the pub was mobbed, because not everyone had Sky. He goes, the pub was mobbed just to watch the premiere of that video. He goes, you'll never get that again with bands, you know what I mean? So unparalleled, eh? It definitely was, right? And see, the thing with Oasis, they just keep coming back into my life, right? So back in the day, obviously people have accused me of looking like a pound shop Johnny Marr because of my Matalan jackets and my hairdo. The thing is, I take that as a compliment, right? Because Johnny Marr's, he's doing all right for his age. Although I do think that's a wig, though. And when you look back, the one I didn't wear the cagoules like Liam, and I didn't have the swagger or the hair, but the guy knew a good pair of shoes. So I was influenced with in the shoe department. So Liam Gallagher back then, everybody, you certainly in my school, wanted to walk around like Liam. And the strange thing is, I'm from Fife, as most people know. But all of a sudden, Russell, people started calling their wee brothers our kid, as if they were in Manchester.
Totally.
Swaggering about, calling their wee brother our kid, and you're like, wow, this is taking things to absolutely new levels, eh? But Oasis were important, and they continue to be important, because I'm a big fan of both their solo work as well. So I'm still a big fan, still hoping for the day that I can go and watch them. But you said Bridgevale there, right? Here's the thing, there is or was a place in Bannockburn called McHugh's. A venue, right? Well, one of my... Did you? Upstairs, Aye. One of my first music assignments when I was doing the music writing was to go and interview Bonehead. And he was playing at McHugh's, I kid you not.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember when he did that. I was there.
Were you there? I've got photos. There's maybe a photo of you and me embracing. Who knows?
You never know. Well, me and Kev have worked out. We reckon we've been in each other's company once as well via default, because it was one of the European games we actually covered on this, and we worked it that night. I was been working, so I had to work these sort of nights, and he was like, I was at a wedding along the road, and I snuck away to watch that game. So I was probably serving him beer.
It's incredible, eh? You've mentioned Kevin. I'm missing him already. What I will say to anybody watching is you won't get the same psychedelia that you maybe would when Kevin's on the show, because he's a psychedelic fella. And I'm more kind of like, I don't go for the parallel universe. I go for the universe I'm actually existing in. But that's why we love Kevin. We're going to miss him tonight. But I'm not going to try and be a Kev. That's why, the lyrics and all that kind of stuff, that's over to you. But Oasis, before we move on, back then, as you say, we'll never see their likes again, because of the cultural impact that a band like Oasis had was similar to the impact of the Roses, where people when people start dressing and talking like the bands as well as being into their music, then you know that they've made a cultural impact. And it's like punk. It's like punk. You know, there was a cultural impact to punk. And often it's because they're reacting. And this is important. They're reacting to a period of time, often politically, that oppresses the working classes. And what happens is all these people who are creative and who are artists, they rebel by, you know, creating art. And a lot of that time that comes out in the form of music. And it's a way to rebel against, you know, those in charge. And I just hope, Russell, that when we come out of this lockdown, there is a whole deluge of fantastic music, and there's a movement, and people who have been, you know, locked up indoors want to get out and play live and set up bands, you know.
To retrain as well. You know, that's got to get your back up, you know.
I know.
That's got to get your back up. If you're getting told to retrain when you've been given a gift, you know, it's like, that's just, you put two fingers up to that and it inspires you even more to stick to what it is that you're dedicated to.
Now, as well as running the show, as long as running the show, you've also got to answer the questions, mate, and they're coming in thick and fast about your co-host.
Well, Kev, I'm afraid, isn't with us right now. He's been on a wee trip with Scott Bain, son a bit of Bosman, but he got his words all tangled, so I'm trying
is that a Bosman? Aye, I get it.
If he is looking for a move away, he may well end up on something like ACSOM, the Rangers State of Mind. I don't know where he's going to stay, so we'll find out. Hopefully we'll be back next week, though, firmly with both his boys, and maybe not with Scott Bain, I don't know. But we need to go in the DeLorean, and where we are going is 1999, February, Fir Park, and a game against Motherwell where we scored. It wasn't just a rout, it was an absolute destruction. But on reflection, Paul, I think if the scoreline read Henrik Larsson 7, Motherwell 1, it would have been still fair, because this for me is when he started. He was a player who we weren't led to believe was a goal-scoring machine. Mm-hmm. He was more, he could play in the hole or he could play up front, but he was more a creator and he would score goals, but he wasn't maybe going to be a wrecking machine in front of goals, you know what I mean? Henrik Larsson, after this game, is standing, after the match finishes, on 25 league goals in 16 games. It's his 30th in all competitions. And this is the 19th of February, 21st of February, something like that. It's a phenomenal record. And then he scores 4 out of 7, but it's his contribution. He's involved in everything. One of them's not even a direct assist, but he's skinned 2 boys, still got the head up to ping it out to the left, cut in for a virtual goal. We'll get to it all. But I think it's one of those games that you always, the best memories that you associate with Henrik, for me, are always first season, because of the goal to stop the 10, and then his O'Neill heyday, do you know what I mean, where he just became, you're looking at the conversation of top 10 strikers in Europe at that point in time. I think that's fair. That's not Celtic bias. But this game, you watch it and you go, do you know, it's unreal to think games like that can almost go under the radar for this man, you know. That one, it's not one of the most mentioned, and yet when you reflect on it, you watch the highlights, like I'm sure you did, you go, he was everywhere. What a player.
See, the strange thing, it's the things you remember. I was having a discussion with Declan earlier because he was in doing the politics show. It's the strange things you remember. Like, I remember that game, and again, you might add things to this and it embellishes it in your memory. I remembered that game when you said this was the game we were going to cover as being in heavy snow. I remember that in my mind, and then I watch it back and there was a few snowflakes, and I'm thinking, it's weird how your mind plays tricks on you like that.
No. I think, were you at the game?
No, I watched that game on Sky.
So that's very interesting you said that. Now, I'll tell you why you thought there was more snow, because I did a lot of thinking about this. So the last 3 goals Celtic score, right, are in the last 10 minutes of the game. Now, the Boyce household's a nice place to be when Celtic are winning 7-1, usually. My dad is going mental, but not in a celebratory way. We've missed the last 3 goals because of the speckles in the Sky screen. That's what it was. Remember, it was speckly satellite.
Is that what it was?
That's what it was. And the speckles are shocking that night in a lot of areas because they'd apologised for it, I'm sure, at one point during the game.
So there you go.
And it was the signals, and it was all the speckles on it was making you think.
So my mind's filled in the blanks there.
Aye.
You know, Don't believe the truth. Don't believe the truth. Honestly. See that thing, they call it, what's it, the golden hour. After something happens, right, there's a golden hour where your recollection, it's all about where that memory sits in your brain, right? Yeah. And then once it goes into the storage part, that's when it starts playing tricks on you. But that golden hour is when it's true. Everything after that, you make it up.
Yep. I know, and it's funny because it was such a point. That was the worst that had ever been, those Sky Speckles that night, and we won 7-1, and he was going daft by this point, my dad. He was raging. And then when you said the snow thing there, I thought, that is uncanny, because it would be easy to see why that has been where your memories took it, but not.
It's weird, eh? But going back to your point about Larsson, right? It was there's some Celtic players that have ended up with Celtic almost as anomalies, and we'll get on to Moravcik later on as well in that famous story. But I remember when Larsson signed, and I just remember him because he was so visually memorable, yes, with the dreads. And when he signed, I remember him playing at the USA tournament in World Cup 1994. Yep. And you just, that's all you can remember of him, and thinking that, all right, we've got this. And you remember the type of player he was, but there was no real fanfare. But again, it was different back then because you didn't have the same access. You couldn't just type in, watch a million videos of him, etc. But we only got him, not by default, but by a slight kind of stroke of luck from the previous manager, Wim Jansen, knowing that there was, this clause in his contract if he was to leave Feyenoord.
That's right, which many wouldn't have known about. That's true.
Yeah. And then it was a similar scenario where Venglos knows about Lubo, where the rest of us don't really know about Lubo as much, and we're able to get him. But I remember, I interviewed a person who was a Feyenoord fan, and she runs the women's section of the supporters group. And I interviewed her for ACSOM, and it was actually for the 50th anniversary of Feyenoord beating Celtic in the European Cup final.
Wow.
Which was last year. So we put the video out. It's on the YouTube channel. But her kind of view on Larsson compared to our view as Celtic fans on Larsson, and this was the club we got him from. Good player. Just a good player, And you think, wow, he went on and he developed with Celtic into, as you say, one of the elite strikers in European football. You look at that performance and compare it to Odsonne Edouard and what he's capable of. Night and day, different levels.
Night and day, especially again, it's one of those ones as well, the conditions, teams not maybe having the best time of it. John Spencer had been sent off after 14 minutes for an elbow. These are the sort of games you look at Odsonne Edouard and goes, I want nothing to do with that. Stephen Craigan at the back hoofing me up in the air every 2 minutes. Nobody wants a part of that. And Henrik's attitude was completely different from that. He was brave, strong in the air, he scores. I watched his goal, and it's just the reverse angle of the header he scores in the 5-1 win over Rangers. It's the exact same header he does. The exact same. I was like, it's almost the same goal. You forget he was 5'8".
Oh, no. He was a beast in the air. An absolute beast.
So good in the air.
Aye.
So good in the air. But anyway, what Kev would normally do, right, is we go through the lineup. So we'll go through the lineup of the team, and you can tell me if anything sticks out at you, or if there's anyone you want to sort of go into in a wee bit more detail. So we lined up with Johnny Gould in goals, Boyd, Reset, Mialbi, Mahe. Mahe was subbed off with 12 minutes to go for Tosh McKinley, who I thought had left by then, to be fair. I didn't realise he was still there. You then had McNamara, Lambert, Moravcik, Blinker, Henrik Larsson, Harold Bratback. Moravcik was taken off for Burnley. We'll get to that because he got injured. And Bratback was replaced by Burchell, who scored within about 2 seconds of being on the pitch. You look at that team. Now, Matt, we talk about this big rebuild, biggest rebuild since Martin O'Neill. That's been quoted on the pod by yours truly, yourself, quite a few times, right? Now, Martin O'Neill's team started, I'm sure, that first 2000-2001 season, winning left, right and centre domestically with Gould, Boyd, Mialbi, Mahe, McNamara, Lambert, Moravcik, Larsson. That's 8.
Yep. You're right, and that's a concern.
And there was another season in between this season and when O'Neill took over. Mm-hmm. And yet they were all starting in Martin O'Neill's first season. So I think with rebuilds, it's important that you go, it sounds maybe worse than it is. If you get a good manager, he'll make the ones that are all underperforming, rather than all having to leave out the exit door. If you get the right manager in, it says Eddie Howe, for argument's sake, he can galvanise players and get them to buy into his ways, methods, philosophies, and then take them to that next level. And most importantly, rededicate them to the cause again, which I think was what Martin O'Neill was doing with a lot of them as well, making them realise what a big deal it was and what a privilege it was they had to actually be there in the first place. You look no further than someone like Bobby Pettit for a prime example of that. But yeah, that team, that's what caught me with. Is there anything in the team that sort of is sticking out at you?
Oh, definitely. I mean, see, when I look at that, there's so many names. You mentioned McKinley there, and obviously McKinley, who headbutted Henrik Larsson at training, broke his nose,
right.
the previous in the previous campaign. That was seen as a watershed moment because apparently, according to the players I've spoken to, the Scottish players and overseas players, they were a bit cliquey. And that broke that tension, believe it or not, as well as breaking Larsson's nose. It broke the tension. So McKinley, I think he was on his last legs. But interestingly enough, there was a goal, and so I'm maybe jumping forward a wee bit, but because we're talking about Tosh, there was a goal here, and I'm just going to double check which one it was. And there's a passage of play, right, and we are missing it. So yeah, here we go. So Henrik Larsson scored his third hat-trick in 4 games. Not only scored 3 goals, he scored 4. But the goal that sealed his hat-trick, if you watch the passage of play, you've got Paul Lambert, a European Cup winner, right?
Yep.
And he picks the ball up. The way that he does it, the first part of the movement, he does exactly what Scott Brown does, right? So he goes back and he collects the ball from the defender. But instantly, what Lambert does is he turns on it in one movement, he makes progress, and he picks the ball out on the left wing to where Tosh McKinley is already doing his overlap. And I just watched that. McKinley, he does what he done in the 95 Scottish Cup final, and he finds his man, because that's what he was brilliant at, right? But there was 2 parts of that goal that we can't do as the current Celtic team. The first one is the link-up between defence and midfield, which Scott Brown at some point has forgotten how to do. Lambert done it brilliantly. And then it was the use of the width. And not only using the width, right, so you imagine that now going out to the left. Taylor wouldn't hit it first time. Taylor wouldn't find his man first time. And it's the simple things that at the time you're taking it for granted. Just, beautiful bit of interplay. But they were doing that time and time again. So when I looked at that goal, I just thought, McKinley, that was brilliant. He was great at that, you finding his man. You've got Lambert, European Cup winner, in there as well. Burley, I think he was coming back from injury, and goals from midfield, unbelievable return from midfield, and then Burchell coming on as a sub, he becomes more pivotal later on in the season when we get to the cup final. But I've said before about Mark Burchell, because he was left out of the team, what I've said about him is that he was potentially the last goal scoring or potential goal scoring striker that we ever produced. I don't think we've produced a goal scorer since Mark Burchell. And he was a golden boy at this stage, wasn't he? You just thought what that boy was going to go on and achieve at that point. He always scored. It was the pace. He could get in behind the defence. I mean, he would have been up against, Craigan and maybe Sean Teal, who had his best days down at Aston Villa and that. So Burchell stands out for me. But Larsson, like you say, what we were watching there was the development and Larsson flourishing in a Celtic side which actually was struggling. We were still 10 points behind Rangers after that victory, which is incredible. But Larsson with the dreads, I just love the sight of him with the dreads. There's a great picture of him against Liverpool going up for a header, and the dreads are just like an octopus, like Medusa. The guy, he was just the best Celtic player I've ever seen. And you know how much I love Paul McStay, but Larsson's the best Celtic player I've ever seen in the flesh.
I agree with that. I think he's iconic as well. That was the thing. And sometimes you need that as well in a team, just someone who stands out. They're a bit different. And then, because it's easier to idolise them. And deep down, the thing is with footballers are all football fans as well. So they get all the same vibes that you get when you're seeing someone that's incredible. I mean, I think if you look at a lot of the interviews when players talk about working with Henrik Larsson day to day, they're kind of in awe of him. Like even though they were his teammate, they're not. Even they didn't look at him as a peer. They looked at him as up there like a fan would. So you definitely do need that. And that also can inspire those around you to play better as well. If you didn't want to muck up, you play with him at Larsson tonight. You didn't want to do a daft layoff, and when he's made a good run, you didn't want to miss him. So it can also elevate the performance of those around him as well.
100%. Russell, you're bringing back a memory of something that somebody told me. And by the way, I know that people say, you're name dropping and this and that. Listen, I've done a lot of interviews back in the day, so you get to speak to players that played for Celtic, and it's a privilege to speak to these guys. But this was during the writing of the Andy Lynch book. And there was a really, really interesting parallel between the two of them, right? So you've got Andy Lynch, who played for Celtic in the 1970s, and his son Simon, who played with Celtic with Henrik Larsson. Yeah. And there was, in fact, not this season, but the following season, when Larsson comes back from his leg break, the last game of the season against Dundee United, Simon Lynch was playing in that game. Might even have been his debut. But interestingly enough, they had the same view. So you're talking about a teammate and looking up to a teammate. So you had Andy Lynch, who looked up to the number 7 at the time, Kenny Dalglish. And you had Simon Lynch looking up to Henrik Larsson. Now, if you didn't know who the player was, you could ask Simon and Andy the same question and they would give you the same answer. So if you said, right, we're talking about this number 7, tell me, what did he do differently for everybody else? And I'm not kidding you, right? Simon and Andy would give you the same answer, but Simon was talking about Henrik Larsson and Andy was talking about Kenny Dalglish. And it was all about the way that they approached every single training session. I mean, they worked tirelessly for the game. But the biggest thing is, Andy talks about scoring a goal in a Scottish Cup final, 1977, and how there was never a moment of doubt in his mind that was going to go in. And he says that, Paul, he's no psychologist, he says, but there's a certain zone for a footballer where you're doing things without thinking, and it's almost effortless. And the reason for that is because you're mentally tuned in. Yes. He says, and the player that I knew that could do that more than anybody else was Kenny Dalglish. Yeah. And you've seen, obviously, how he benefited. But then if you speak to Simon, he says the exact same thing. The one player that could tune into a game, right, and be completely focused on that game was Henrik Larsson. So the parallels was incredible. Different generations, but the same approach to the game.
Absolutely brilliant. See with the game, a couple of things as well. It was a shame Andy Gorham was missing, wasn't it? He was missing for a wee bit of nonsense. I don't know why. But it would have been great to have put the 7 past him. Do you know what I mean? I think that would have been... he caused a lot of heartbreak, do you know what I mean, for us, and I think it would have been sweeter if it had been him in goals rather than our, of course, infamous goalkeeping coach now, Stevie Woods, who, I don't know... See him trying to get down to Moravcik's free kick?
He's still going down.
He actually is teaching barcasting now. You know what I mean?
I think we've seen the signs, mate. We've seen the signs why barcast...
we're digging you out now, Stevie. You're getting a free ride before this show, mate.
Aye. But I think you make a good point about Gorham there, because... these are the things about Andy Gorham back in the day, and he was talking about the mental health struggles that he had as a player, when he used to call out to the Scotland squad and all this as well. So there was always that kind of sympathy. And then Tommy Burns with the words about having his name on the gravestone, he broke his heart. But then I think back to the 3-3 game against Rangers when Gorham saved a penalty from Pierre Van Hooydonk.
Yep.
And if you go back to that game and you can lip read what Andy Gorham says to Pierre after he saved that penalty.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to like the guy.
Right. I get you. No,
anybody, who, and I've got sympathy for anybody who's got a mental health struggle. But when you watch that particular game, what he called Pierre Van Hooydonk after saving his penalty, I've got no respect. I've got no respect for anybody that can behave like that. So, I agree. It would have been lovely to put 7 past Andy Gorham.
It would be nice. It would be a sweeter thing. And there was a player in the midfield for Celtic as well, right? So I was trying to think. Because what I always try and do in the show is you look back at years like you kind of did straight away, and then you compare it with the modern equivalent or the modern. So it's easy to have the conversation with Henrik Larsson had been a £50 million player, £100 million player, right? But it was the Burley player in the midfield came to Chelsea. Having played over 100 games for Chelsea in the English Premier League, probably a club at that point in time. I think they'd been in 2 FA Cup finals in the last couple of years. In that spell that he was in the first team, and probably finishing, I don't know, 5th, 4th, around there.
Mm-hmm.
We're bringing him then for £2.5 million. So that was, 98, I think. £2.5 million. You go fast forward 23 years. What is the equivalent of that? Because for Celtic, £2.5 million is still big pennies to be signing on a player. That's still, it still seen as a lot. It's still back in bio. You know what I mean? It's bio money. And then you wonder why the team's deteriorating a wee bit. And you go, Celtic's never seem to have... I get that Scottish football income is dwarfed by other countries and that, but the one trick Celtic have for being in a smaller league is it's easier to win it, and that then gets you access to Champions League riches. And I think when you look over at how many years we've missed out on 35 million bounties, maybe the odd season will run even further than that in the tournament. Again, it enhances then the value of your full squad. You're not selling Van Dijk for 12 million, you're selling him for 20, plus his 20% sell-on fee or whatever it was. That's the thing, because they're Champions League regulars.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. That's where we've not put the foot down. I just think, that signing Craig Burley then would be the equivalent of us signing what? Kovacic, something like that from Chelsea today. And you think how far removed from reality that now is for Celtic. Not all Celtic's doing, but Celtic could only impact Celtic. Do you know what I mean? So we can't worry about what the other leagues are doing and what crazy billions are getting put in that. But what more could we have done to be able to still attract, not just on loan, because I hate that. I hate that loan push. Honestly, I hate it. I would like to see us being able to compete at a higher or a bigger table in terms of transfers than what we are. And that is going to involve a lot of hard work now and a bigger name manager for us, for sure. But I just thought, you looked at Craig Burley, I thought, we signed him from again. And there he is, Chelsea, over 100 appearances for Chelsea. And you go, that ain't happening again anytime soon for us. That's a struggling Celtic team, remember.
Well, listen, I think that point you make there, you could also say that about Paul Lambert. We signed a European Cup winner, Paul Lambert, for Borussia Dortmund. And the big thing with that, which I love, I always will bring this up every time the two of them get mentioned, is that they were identified by Tommy Burns. So Tommy Burns had obviously set up this massive scouting operation, and Davy Hay was part of that, Andy Ritchie was part of that, and Davy Hay's remit a lot of the time was the overseas players. So you're bringing in players like Di Canio, Van Hooijdonk, George Cadet, Andy Tom. We almost signed David Ginola. These things that you look back on, you think, wow. But two of the other players that had been identified by Tommy as part of that scouting process were Craig Burley and Paul Lambert. It just so happens that by the time they were available and we bought them, a different manager had come in. And I always use that as an example when people, and I'm part of this problem, I guess. People are going on and complaining about Celtic signing players when the manager doesn't have the final say. Well, when you look at Paul Lambert coming in under Wim Jansen, in fact, Craig Burley also coming in under Wim Jansen, how much of a say did he have? I'm sure he would have had the final say.
It was highly unlikely that was on his wee scroll of paper. The back of Wim Jansen's fag packet was Craig Burley. I doubt it, you know what I mean?
I know, fag packet, I like that. Lambert and Burley, aye. Because I think they used to call him Lambert and Butler. So, no, you're right. So these are deals that were maybe 12 months in the making. And Wim Jansen's come into it, and you're not going to turn them down. But, they weren't his players, really.
Darren Jackson, Wim Jansen signed as well. Again, I don't know how much Wim Jansen was following Darren Jackson's career when he was in Holland. I'm going to guess not that much, but I don't know what. I don't want to be disrespectful to Darren Jackson, decent player and all that, but I think you're right. I think it's, there's got to be more elements involved than just a manager picking a player, or going with a list of players and getting every single one of them. But then it comes down to, I suppose, and then it's supposed to contradict it. How well did Wim Jansen know Davy Hay?
I know.
Why would he be trusting David Hay? So this is where you now get to the issue now with a manager, right? Is they need to have full faith that the guy suggesting players, even if they've not heard of him, they trust. implicitly.
Yep.
Hence how you might end up with Eddie Howe wanting a Richard Hughes there, for example. But the flip side is that always right? Or should it be the best guy in the dugout and the best guy who can identify players, and they're going to need to work together? It's a tough one to weigh up, and I wonder what one works most successfully. Because you can, just to finish, sorry, could you ever imagine, to be cynical, that if you're bringing your buddy in to be the director of football, the guy who identifies players, could it really just be the list that you gave him that he's working off?
Potentially. See, I think the Wim Jansen, we've come all these years later, but I think the Wim Jansen example is a good one, because Murdo McLeod was in place before Jansen came in. Now, how often have we criticised Celtic for doing that? Oh, we'll set up your backroom team. But it didn't harm Wim Jansen.
No.
Didn't harm him. He came in. I mean, there's no doubt.
I'm back where JP was, yes. I'm blaming COVID all over again.
Talking of COVID, 1999's COVID was Y2K. That was the one that was going to end the world, wasn't it?
The Millennium Bug, mate. They were just 20 years out, Paul.
I know.
They were 20 years out. The real Millennium Bug happened in 2020, not 2000.
See, I find it really, really interesting that back then, I could not fail to remember this, that where you currently work, I worked there. I actually worked where you currently work. And they handed out these mugs, right? And they were Y2K mugs. What to do in the event of every single account being lost overnight and all this stuff. And there was an emergency phone line and all this. And everybody was like building up to this moment where, you were getting ready to start looting shops and everything and nicking computers and that. And it didn't quite happen. It was a bit of a damp squig.
20 years on, still can't get any past on tempo, you know what I mean?
But that reminds me then as well of the kind of songs that not necessarily we're going to be talking about, but songs like Prince 1999, Pulp, Disco 2000, because there was this expectation that would be the best new year of all time, moving into the new millennium and everything else. And I don't know if I appreciated it, to be fair, because everybody was so paranoid that the world was just going to end and all the streetlights would start going out and, there'd be some kind of alien invasion. But as you say, they were just 20 years too late, weren't they?
I know. And back to the game as well, right? So the first 3 goals are all dead balls. Henrik with a penalty. Jed Brannan with a peach free kick from Motherwell, who actually equalised with 10 men. You wouldn't have thought at that point, okay, they're down to 10 men, but you wouldn't have thought they were in for they got themselves back in the game, a 7-1 drubbing. And then Lubo's free kick. Now, we spoke a couple of weeks ago in Screamacelica for a long time about Nakamura's techers. So I've got to ask you the question, who had the better techers? Naka or Lubo?
See, this is where you've got to try and get the perception out your mind and look at the two of them and say, right, let's try and even this up. Because I preferred, as a player, and an era even, I preferred Lubo, right?
Yeah.
As a player. But when it comes to technique, and I've heard so many people saying they've never seen somebody kicking a ball with both feet the way that Moravcik could do it. He could do it with, corner kicks, the works. He was a magician. But then you look at Nakamura and you think of some of the things he could do with a ball. I tell you what, that's a difficult question, Boyce. So you should have prepared me for that one.
The mess up becomes the messy. This is great.
I'm going to go all in and admit before I answer this that a lot of this might just be I'm reminiscing here, and a lot of it's nostalgic. I'm going to go Lubo.
Yeah, I think Lubo as well because of the two-footed aspect. I think Nakamura could use his right foot. I don't think he wasn't like a Laurent Robert who literally just used his right foot for balance. You know what I mean? I think, but I always remember with Lubo, right? And it's one of these things. Folk won't remember, but I remember at the time when no one noticed he just did that. He comes on as a sub away. I'm sure it was Rosenborg away in the Champions League. Comes on as a sub. We've got a free kick, and he just jogs on, doesn't break stride, and hits the free kick. So he's done like a 30-yard run up from the touchline and has a shot. He never actually stopped. He just ran on, and who can do that? You've not even looked at the angles yet. You've not stood behind the ball. Took in the angles of that, or he didn't score, didn't get me wrong. But I mean, I just thought stuff like that's just magic, isn't it?
See, sometimes, I mean, people remember him controlling the ball with his backside against Hearts and all this different stuff. And his first game against Rangers and all that, which, you've got to remember all that. But sometimes, I mean, I remember his performance against Bordeaux at Celtic Park. He scored that night as well. And it's just sometimes... Well,
that was Landis for them, wasn't it?
Oh, I would need to check the wiki for that one, mate.
Landis, I think he scored 2 against us and then flopped in the English Premier League. They must have thought he was half decent. So we're just crap in Europe, mate, honestly. It could have been anyone.
I know. But I just remember that performance of Lubo and watching him intently. And I used to do the same with Larsson as well. And at that time, I used to take my nephew to the games. And, he thought I was a complete strange kind of character because I would say, right, watch him. And he's like, I'm watching the game. But I used to watch specific players when I went back in those days because you could. And I was interested to see the work off the ball. How did they get that space? The guy was an absolute genius. One other point I'd say about Larsson as well is that, that old saying, to make something look effortless takes a lot of effort. That's what comes to my mind when I think about Larsson because... Neil Lennon and Chris Sutton actually agreed and said that they would need to, even on family holidays, try and keep fit, go for runs on the beach before the kids got up and all this kind of stuff during pre-season, right? And they would turn up and Larsson's not done a thing, but he's not put on a single pound, not an ounce, just this natural ability. But what I believe, having spoken to a lot of people, is I bet that's not the case. I bet he's been dedicated through the pre-season. And he's just making it look effortless, Russell. He's turning up a wee bit nonchalant, thinking, this is all natural, guys, but he's actually worked for it,
Of course. No, I'd subscribe to that massively. I think that's definitely the case. I think as well with the game was the variety of goals that he scored. So obviously the penalties, which me and Kev spoke about a couple of penalties Henrik missed, maybe, after a while. But I think sometimes... I know Dennis Irwin did it for years at United, was the penalty taker, but I think sometimes, I suppose if they're not missing, why would you take them out the firing line? But I don't know, I think that should maybe come with a time span as well and just pass it on because it definitely, it could become a bit of a burden. And then there's far more research for goalkeepers to work out, how often he goes down the middle, how often for his body shape and he's going to put it in a corner if they've got more of a catalogue of penalties to work with. But that penalty puts in is the definition of side netting. And then you're looking at the goal where he skinned 3 or 4 boys all at once and he just hammers it down the middle. He just drills it. Aye. And you go, there's the variety. And then the Tosh McKinley, ironically, cross. Obviously they were scrapping the year before and then Tosh McKinley puts this cross. And the goalie actually stands kind of in anticipation of this ball going high in the top corner, wherever it goes. Larsson really just cushions it on his foot along the deck on a volley. A very unusual volley, not the type of volley you see very often. And again, just pure technique. I mean, it's like he's wearing slippers for it. That's what it's like the balls came off. Because that's travelled, as you say, 30, 40 yards because it was hit early by Tosh McKinley. And when it comes off his foot, it's actually trickling over the goal line. Frightening. And then you've got the header. And I just feel, for me, that encompassed what he was all about in the sense that he scored all varieties of goals. All varieties of goals, even in the one game. Like that. And to have all that in your locker is truly just immense. And it's a shame that when you look at that team, and as I say, there was that gap between the 2000-2001 season where we romped it, with a lot of that same lineup, as I pointed out. It's funny that they probably at no point realised, because of Rangers' dominance, Rangers were a treble that season or whatever, they probably never realised they were on the cusp, or there was just sign missing, but they were actually one hell of a side, as the nucleus was there. They just needed, that magic dust, you know what I mean?
See, the nucleus that you talk about, I think when you're looking at it now, and hindsight's a great thing, but they'd proved it, the season before, so we should have known that the likes of Larsson, Moravcik, these types of player, Moravcik came in this season, Lambert, for example, McNamara, solid. one thing I would say about the free kick from Jed Brannan is that Johnny Gould should have got that. God, he should have got that. But there was that nucleus, and as you say, you then bring in the orchestrator of that, Martin O'Neill, to do the magic with him. My concern for next season, if I could just jump into a topical term at the moment, is that, for example, the nucleus of let's say the defence, we could be looking at Bain, Ralston, Taylor, Welsh and Hendry, or Barkas, O'Connor, Bolingoli, Held and Beaton at the moment. So I've got major concerns about the facelift that we require for the team. The goal that you mentioned where he's got absolutely no right to take on the 4 defenders because they're completely blocking his route. And somehow, and there's one moment, and it might be big Sean Teal, he just goes to the ground and you think, well, he can't get past that. Somehow, he meanders his way through it. And the one player in our current team who's tremendous at doing that is Odsonne Edouard, right?
Yep.
I mean, the feet, sometimes the feet are incredible. But a lot of the time, there isn't the end product. What did Larsson do? 12 yards out, sticks it away.
Hammers it. That's different.
Cool as you like.
Doesn't all need to be nice. Mm-hmm. You can finish ugly sometimes as well. I mean, we spoke about obviously the volley at Ibrox in the Scottish Cup from Edward, when he just needed to put his laces through it, and instead he's went for that bizarre flick thing. And you look at Larsson there, he's basically on the penalty spot sort of area, and so he had the ability to go, not everything needs to be nice. I've just done the nice bit. He just rifles it straight, low and hard. It goes actually down the middle of the goal. He's just, do you know what I mean? It's not even in the corner of that, but it's just going, knowing when to play nice and knowing when to win. And I think there's a big difference. And as for the fast feet work thing with Edouard, the difference with Henry was there was actually players there. He tries to do it when there's nobody even there half the time. He's trying to take that ball in.
Beats himself.
There's nobody there, mate. And if there is, it's like some diddy for Hamilton, do you know what I mean? Like, calm right down, mate, do you know what I mean? He overcomplicates.
He does.
Overcomplicates simpler situations. Now, is that because his heart's not in it and he's not taking it as seriously as he should be? Or if you are finding situations like that complicated, maybe you're not as good as what we thought you were, because you've got to know the difference, eh?
I think you're right. Like that chance against Rangers, I wouldn't try that in my back garden, kicking a ball about with my wee boy, right? But I also wouldn't try his Panenka, you call it, what he done against Craig Gordon. Yeah, I wouldn't have tried that either. So when it comes to the kind of arrogant side of it, if you don't pull it off, you look like a complete diddy. And I think that's what happened for Eddie. Interestingly enough, you mentioned that John Spencer was sent off that night against Celtic for Motherwell, and obviously Moravcik starred. Unfortunately, got injured this night, and I think he was off for the remainder of the season.
Cup final, he came back.
Aye, and it just brings to light again the fact that, you know, John Spencer was a player that Hugh Keevins thought we should have signed instead of Moravcik, and it just shows you the complete lack of respect. Now, we've been talking today about guys getting banned from Celtic Park for saying things that the club don't like or criticising the club, and obviously there was a bit of that around the old Hugh Keevins. But back then,
as much as I like Hugh Keevins, he should have got banned from football for saying that. Do you know what I mean? After Moravcik's first couple of games, you've just been winging it the whole time, Hugh. The whole time. You don't anything about this game, mate. You know what I mean?
Moravcik had played in the 1990 World Cup finals, you know, for Czechoslovakia, ironically enough, under Joseph Venglos. Yes. And I always remember that because I think there was some kind of deal. My dad had bought Gillette razors and you got a free video. It was a World Cup 90 video. And Lubo Moravcik was in it for Czechoslovakia. So there you go. That's how you remember these things. So I knew a wee bit about Moravcik, right? I
like things like that, though, because we were talking about the Stereophonics a few weeks ago, you remember, on Screamacelica. And the reason I got into them with the song 1,000 Trees was because it was on a mixed compilation of upcoming bands, and the CD was attached to a cereal box of Golden Grahams.
That is tremendous, mate. That is tremendous. Hey, by the way, I still think that was a great tune. 1,000 Trees, great. It
was.
Superb track. I liked that. I actually liked that album. Word Gets Around. I really did like that. But this is the thing. I mean, how difficult would it have been for Hugh Keevins to get on the news desk or speak to a player who had played in France, for example. You know,
that's true.
Who might have had a wee bit of knowledge of Lubo, and you know, rather than that, he just dives in with the size 9s and just writes them off. But we came back to haunt him. But there were so many bad kind of headlines around Celtic at that time. I remember the McCann one. You know, there was a picture of Fergus McCann alongside a picture of Saddam Hussein, Russell, and I think if it wasn't the Daily Record, it was the other red top, and I think, you know, the headline might have been dictator or something like that. How on earth do you get away with that? Absolutely nonsensical.
See, whilst obviously it's a slightly different show tonight because Kev's not on anyway, so we go down rabbit holes anyway. So, whilst we've got you on, obviously you're the face right now of a massive, you know, I don't know, where are we at in the Apple all-time list now? Must be number
17. 17.
We're going right in that chat.
The 17th most listened to podcast in the UK of all time.
Now, you think of that with football. Why are football fans, well, we know why, but why is it that correction is now happening so massively across all footballing supporters now? Because it's not like it's only Celtic fans that are listening to fan-owned media. Loads of clubs are doing it, and really successfully, like yourself as well. You listen to that quote from Hugh Keevans now. Two sides to it. Firstly, he's not done any journalism whatsoever on Lubomir Moravcik, but he has a formed opinion on John Spencer. So that's good enough in the journalism stake. So I know about one of them. I know one's half decent, right? Secondly, is there a case of it playing to the gallery and playing to your listenership and knowing that the majority of the time, if you listen to Clyde One, you are going to be a Rangers or be a Celtic fan. Rangers at that point are the dominant team, spending a lot more money than £300,000 on a player. Cheap pops are all good for the listening, the listening public that I've got, you know, tuning in right now, and that's what it seems to be about now. The reason I think fan media has been so successful, the Bulletin, for example, being the main show in A State of Mind, is because fans are sick of it. Fans are sick of it. They don't want shock jocks on there anymore. They know fine well when a Celtic State of Mind was at 12:30 every weekday, they know that I'm going to get hunters wrong. Do you know what I mean? Statistics, stats and all that. You know what I mean? They know they're not going to agree with everything you say. They know that they're not going to agree with everything that Tony says. Or they might, in fact, everyone seems to agree with everything he says. I'll take that one back. But anyway, everyone else, do you know what I mean? They might not agree with it, but they know it's from the gut. They know that folk are just talking from their own mindset, from their own state of mind. And then it's like that what you end up with is a far more refreshing content. And I think you look back at this sort of time, and how funny is it? You've got John Spence getting sent off for a daft elbow 2 yards away for a referee, and Lubo curling home an absolute perler in the net. And you wonder why people are turning off MSM more and more and listening to like your own multimedia company.
I think, there's been years and years where you didn't have the choice. They didn't have the variety. And interesting enough, you've obviously got a couple of big phone-ins in the kind of west side of kind of Scotland. I've never really subscribed to that, the phone-ins. I've never really been a big fan for no other reason than it's just never been part of my day-to-day kind of existence. But I know that they've been massive for years. And I just think that a lot of the time they are agenda-driven, right? So if they try to drive an agenda and that... maybe an anti-Celtic agenda. For years and years, a lot of Celtic fans might have had to either switch off or just put up with it. And it's, you know, now that fan media is in the ascendancy, there's so much choice, which is great. But at the same time, I think back to when, you know, Sky TV was a new thing and you thought this was great with all these channels. You very quickly realised that most of the channels were dross. So it's not just about giving loads and loads of options, it's also to then try and give something that is bespoke to a degree and quality. Try and make it, and I think the quality comes from the people who contribute. I think that if you get a team of people, and there's an element of luck in there as well, Russell, where the people that are coming in all have a strong voice, a different voice, and they're able to articulate it.
You want to know the interview process, by the way? 5 interviews, guys. Honestly, I was sitting there, I had to do a presentation a lot.
That was good. The PowerPoint presentation was good, Russell, I've got to say. But then, I just think that you've got that. But then media is changing. You look at even, how do we watch telly now? Nobody sits on a Tuesday night at 7:30 and says, right, my programme's on at. You know, everybody watches their TV on YouTube, Netflix, Amazon Prime. Everything's got to be on demand, you know. And I just think that now, with the podcasting and putting things on YouTube, miss it at 12:30 because of your shift and just watch it at 6. Fair enough, you can't comment live, but you can still get a flavour of who's saying what, who's agreeing, who's disagreeing, and who's falling out. Strange enough, there's not been much falling out this season. Me and Lawrence have our moments, but there's been plenty of disagreements, but that's fine. That's what it's all about. But I do think that alternative media is going to just go one way, and that's up. And I think, you know, we've seen print media for a long, long time. And there's a certain thing about me where I know that a lot of Celtic fans are probably celebrating the death of print media. There's certain titles, I mean, you know, my dad was a striking miner, and if you weren't a friend of the striking miners in terms of the press, then you're no friend of mine, and that will never change. But you don't want to see good, hard-working, working-class journalists, you know, getting pushed out because the circulation that might have been 1 million a day is down at 100,000. So I just think there will be that kind of like transference of ability from print to online. But I do think that some of the big titles are catching up. They're playing catch up because there is no agenda with a lot of the fan media stuff. I mean, I've said in the past, Russell, a lot of the figures this season's been because we've been so bad. I would much rather the figures weren't as high and Celtic were doing well. And that day will come. Yeah. My big concern is it might not be as soon as we want it to happen, especially while we're dragging our heels. But I just think you embrace it. You've got to embrace it. And always try, I always say, when others are zigging, you've got to zag. And don't follow the crowd. Don't follow the crowd. Do your own thing.
Absolutely. But I just think it is poignant because I was thinking about that exact quote. You know, I think it was if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, something like that. It said. And there was no racial connotation with that, but it was just he was basically saying it's that you know you only were willing to spend 300,000. You wouldn't push the boat out for John Spencer's, you know, whatever it was a week that he was on, and you could end up with a dumpling. It was nothing like that, and that is again because of the shock jock attempts that were for whatever reason, obviously creating popularity at the time. And now they just, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's because there's that many options out there as well. You don't get away with that anymore. No. Because I can switch off to, say if you listen to Clyde 1 at 6 o'clock, you've just nailed it perfectly. I can switch that off in the car going home and have a plethora of podcasts that, as you just said a minute ago, you can listen to on demand.
Plethora is a word, mate. I remember back in the day, probably back in about 1999 actually, Russell, having a conversation, and it was all about propaganda in the media, and there's some great Noam Chomsky books for anybody who likes a read. Go out there, he just basically enlightens you all around the way that the world works, especially in political and media terms. And I remember having this late night discussion with a friend of mine who won't be watching this, but because he's not a big football fan, but he was a big music fan, and there was some kind of world issue happening in a country, a far-flung country, and we were watching it. And I remember saying to him, you know, our whole life we have seen this. We've seen this disease and disaster and famine all our entire lives. And I think back to Band-Aid, and I remember watching all that live and everything, Russell, when I was a kid. And I says, but they're in so much power, the BBC, that they could make anything up they wanted. You know, the TV could tell us that man landed on the moon, and we would believe it. You know, and they had that control to a much greater degree. And that is the very essence of propaganda, where they could tell you just about anything, and because you don't have an alternative, and that's why this is called alternative media, people tended to believe it. So you had almost party political broadcasts telling you how to think and how to vote.
And we're both full of nonsense, by the way. We're just lying. The whole thing's just a whole setup, by the way. Just so you know. But I think the Inca Band-Aid as well. Yeah. I mean, it was always a wee bit ironic, wasn't it? Because it was about starving kids, but Bob Geldof had dined out and I Don't Like Mondays for about 30 years, do you know what I mean?
Aye. I know. And see, the thing with the charity side of it as well is, they do play on your heartstrings, because I'm not saying don't give to charity, the absolute opposite. But I just think these big organisations, Russell, there's so many fat cats, skimming for the top, that you think back to that and we're still seeing the same tragedies and the same famine and the same issues all these years later. And that's where you start thinking, what happened to all the millions, And we try, with regards to the Celtic State of Mind, obviously starting last year on a live circuit prior to that, to give as much as we can, but trying to do it to local charities where you can hand over the money and they can actually say, this is what we've done with that cash. And trying to keep it in those terms, because I just think there's so many people profiting from charity that I tend to avoid the bigger ones,
As you know, I used to do the streams of Championship Manager, and that had only really sort of took off the past sort of 18 months, and then lockdown happened, and I started doing 2 different series. The Charlton one was called Into the Valley, which I know will make you laugh, because you know something, you have a connection with that song title.
I do.
And then at night, I think we were in charge of Barnet FC, and it was called Dodgy Barnets, obviously. And but they were getting a lot of viewers. I say a lot of viewers, like 30, 40 folk watching a 20-year-old game. It's no bad. And basically what we did was, on May the 1st last year, I just sat, and at this point, my mum's, remember, I wasn't meant to be living at my mum's for long, right? Lockdown happens, I'm sitting on her couch in a room with a laptop on my knees, and I did a stream for 24 hours straight. No sleep, no nothing, and raised like £1,700.
That's immense.
But I got like Goal.com journalist on, to interview about how he got into it. I had ex-players from the game on, like who had played for Coventry and Cheltenham Town and stuff like that. It was class. And you go, the message I was getting at the time, where this is a new media for us. That's what folk were saying. They were going, why would I want to watch what's on the telly when I can go into this and get real banter, which is just, not going to say it's soulful, it's a wee bit far when we're talking about a game, but it's from the soul. The patter you were getting was just real. And I think there's not enough real in the world. I mean, there's a lot of Kardashian nonsense now, and you get a show like Screamacelica, which I'm grateful that so many folk watch it and all that stuff, but it's like, I think they know, you know what I mean? He's not, like, there's no airs of graces, there's no one trying too hard or anything like that, do you know what I mean?
There is a charm to that as well, though, because I mean, some of my favourite podcasts are very much like that, and you think, well, you could never expect to hear or see this on a mainstream channel, but that's the beauty of it. It's renegade, it's rebellious, alternative, rebel, whatever you want to describe it as. But that for me is the beauty of it, and I'm looking forward to your big plans to take it on the live circuit. You and Kevin Boyce, the Kevin Boyce show. But I think the charity element's brilliant, because you're watching it in a click of a button or a click of a link, you can just throw a couple of quid in and then everybody come together. That's real community, and I think the Celtic State of Mind listeners did that in abundance last year. I mean, that was humbling. Yeah. I still think back to that and think, wow, 28 grand raised incredible over a weekend. Incredible. Unbelievable. Aye, it was. And, if you do something like that again next year as well, we'll need to set a target of 30 just straight from the get-go, because it will be higher. It'll be bigger. There's a few things we're going to be doing differently. I mean, I think having a weekender is a great idea. Obviously, you've done it yourself. It's a tough gig, but it's a great idea. But there'll be a few other wee bits that we're working on. There'll be a music element. We might do an ACSOM special. I'm not saying if it's going to be genuine or if we're going to get people in to impersonate certain individuals. But also, see, when I was a kid, mate, I was probably still am to this day, very obsessive about what I was focusing on. Like, if I wanted to do something, I became obsessed by it until I figured out a way how to do it, right? And I remember reading a story about George Conley, the great George Conley, who came from the same village as me, and how he went round the Celtic Park doing keepy-uppies. And I remember reading in this article how he could do 1,500 keepy-uppies, right? Now, I was just a kid. I was maybe, 11 or 12 when I read this. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. I want to do that, right? So what I started doing was going out and practicing every single night with a football. And you go from having a record 100 to having a target of 250 to saying, right, 1,000, and you get 1,000, you think, right, I want to do 2,000, and then you build up and build up. I'm not going to reveal how much I managed to do because a lot of people don't believe you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this into my charity, because I'm going to give a figure out to the ACSOM audience and say, well, you know, I'm going to try and raise that figure by doing that amount of keepy uppies.
Yes.
And the camera doesn't lie, because I'm going to have to do it on camera.
Brilliant.
But I did read two things that interested me, just to give you an idea of the figure, because I'm not going to reveal it. But I remember reading about a player who we actually interviewed recently on a Celtic State of Mind, Stuart Slater. And Stuart Slater could do 10,000, and I thought, that's not bad. And then I read recently, Pat Nevin, because Pat Nevin's released a book, and I spoke to Pat last week, and he could do 10,000 at the age of 8, and I thought, that's not bad.
What?
Aye, at the age of 8. So I'm going to work that into some kind of charitable thing, because people will say, there's no way you can do that figure. And I'll say, well, chuck a few quid in then, and we'll see about that.
Yep, I like that.
We'll get it filmed. We'll have to have a sped up version for people who can't be bothered watching it, but there will be proof available.
That'd be brilliant. That'd be brilliant. Well, we got the music. Let's go to the music.
Good year for music, this, by the way. Very good year for music.
I mean, obviously you were producing last week, Paul, and I mean, the struggle for me and Kev was real.
It was, I could tell.
2008.
It was only 9 years after this vintage year.
It's I'm talking about it was the worst chart I can't. I don't know now. My worry for Screamacelica is, how do we actually do anything past 2008? So if 2008 was that bad, it's only got worse, has it not?
I think it has, mate. I mean, I look at I'm a big downloader. My big brother's far more of a traditionalist when it comes to music. We used to meet up once a month and go to Edinburgh, and we would go with our wages, and we'd go clothes shopping and music shopping, have a couple of drinks, and then come back home to Fife. That's what we used to do once a month. That was the brotherly thing that we did.
Cool.
And it was all physical music, you know. And it's this era that we're talking about. We're talking the 90s. And then he would turn me on to different things, and I would do likewise, and that's just the way it worked. He's continued that. He still buys all his music physically. My brother's only 11 months older than me, so we've got a lot in common. But I don't buy physical music anymore. Everything I buy is download, mate. Everything. But a lot of it is retrospective buying. You know, I'm going back on discographies that I've maybe explored for an album or two. Very little new music. I like the Snuts. I did like that. And of course, we've got our own music show, Unplugged, and I'm trying to get as many new bands on that as possible, and they're turning me on to new music, because I was right into my new music, always having your finger on the pulse. I think the easier it's got to access, the more difficult it is to find the bands that mean something.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know?
Well, it's like, have you ever thought about it? See, when you got a jukebox, right? You used to got a jukebox, right? And it'd be one of the older ones, and you could see the CDs sliding along to like queue up your song. How many CDs was there, Paul? 10, 20? You spent your money easy. You go up to a jukebox now, it's got every song in the world on it, and your mind goes blank straight. I can't even think of any. This is the thing. And by the way, I'm going to have to pull this one up because I love this. I could talk about this all night. Zinco Vix, Blur Oasis. Not even a question, mate. They're not night and day for me, night and day. You see what I love, right? Comedy band, man. One's got Matt Lucas cutting about in a doctor's suit. You know what I mean? That was a poor moment. I've got to say. I remember at the school, Oasis, and buying definitely maybe on cassette. I remember that because at that time I had a paper round because that was the done thing. But I had more than one paper. I done the Sean Puffy Coombs thing and went to the paper shop when I moved into the area and asked them how many rounds they had, and says, give me them all. Because I had to buy for a Celtic season ticket. And then you obviously had a bike and you done as many as you can. But I bought that definitely maybe, and I was hooked from the first listen. I was hooked from the very first time I heard Live Forever, with that video with Liam sitting on a chair stuck on the wall. In midair, aye. So I know that they had released Supersonic and Shaker Maker before Live Forever, but they'd gone over my head or under the radar. Yeah. And then I heard that song and I just thought, wow. So I was Oasis first, and then I remember the whole Blur v Oasis thing and all that. But I've got to say, also a big Blur fan.
also a very big Blur fan, and I've seen both bands live, and they were both excellent live. And you know,
I've seen Blur live, and they were absolutely dreadful.
Was it at Tina Park?
He made up some excuse that they'd been like delayed and that. He just came out wrecked. He was rolling about the floor singing and that. I was like, what are you doing? I thought you were meant to be the intellectual one, Damon. You know what I mean? I thought he was he's a genius and that. Look, the state here.
I remember that.
And they were 45 minutes late. It was poor. And then they played Tender for at least 15 minutes.
See, the thing with that, mate, I'm going to go against some of my musical kind of like tastes here, because I remember that Tina Park being famous for the Mogwai t-shirt. And I don't like swearing, but I'm quoting the t-shirt, Blur are shite, right? And that was the Mogwai t-shirt, and I'm a massive Mogwai fan. But
one show with me, that's Paul swearing now and everything.
I know. I'm quoting Mogwai. I'm allowed to quote Mogwai. But Blur, I've got a lot of time for Blur. But if I was to pick, you know, it's like the knack of your Lubo thing. If I was to pick, I picked Lubo and I'll pick Oasis.
Good. Talk to us about your CD for the week, mate.
Well, you gave me the rules, because as you quite rightly said, I'm normally on the buttons. I'm normally just sitting here on the buttons. So the rules were not necessarily released this week, but certainly in the charts this week. Because if you were asking for a release, I might have been struggling. So the album, and at some point I'll chuck in a few of the others that you know I was fond of, but the album that played a massive part, it wasn't released this week, but it was sitting at number 29 in the charts, was Air with Moon Safari. What an LP this was, right? And I guess I've got my musical tastes, and I like a bit of the old indie rock, I like rap, in fact, I like hip-hop, I like just about everything, mate.
Could just see you with a visor on upside down, Paul, cutting about Dunfermline.
Oh, man. You've seen it? Did you say you've seen it? And no, I like everything other than. It would be easier for me to say other than. I don't like kind of death metal stuff. I don't like that stuff that goes far too loud and shouty. I think my level stops in terms of hard rock, probably stops at Rage Against the Machine, who I love. But anything harder than that, and I'm struggling. But just about anything else, I love it. And Air, Moon Safari, was a wee bit of a departure, because it was one of the ones, all I kept reading at the time was it was a coffee table album, Russell. I always remember people using this new term, it's a coffee table album. So it was one of these ones that if you went to a trendy bar, or if you went to, you know, somewhere trendy in Edinburgh to get your hair cut, which obviously I never did, you might hear this album in the background, you know. And then there was loads of other albums that came out maybe on the back of that, by bands like Royksop and all these other bands that had that, you know. And the big thing for me with the and I've got it on this laptop here with Moon Safari, everything about it, the best song on it was the classic, which was also a single. It was called All I Need, for me, right? But you also had a song possibly about you called Sexy Boy that was on it, which was a big single. But it was just classic kind of down tempo. It was a French album.
I remember Sexy Boy, the song, though. I do remember it very well.
It was great. And then on the single of that, you had like remixes from the likes of Beck, you know, and they were just like, there was this movement of this kind of lo-fi kind of, it wasn't dancey, there was the bit of the electronic about them, you know. And these two French guys came out with that. And then, of course, you want to know more about them, and then they do a soundtrack for the Virgin Suicides records. And eventually I seen them live, and I probably got into other kind of music like Boards of Canada through Air were my gateway into something a wee bit more obscure, because Boards of Canada were a wee bit more obscure. There was less kind of focus on the vocal with Boards of Canada, more instrumental. And then that took me down this other diverse route of things like the Aphex Twin, which was just bizarre but good fun at the same time. And then, you know, even further afield, maybe into things like Frenchman 3, that obviously got me interested in Spiritualised. And then the most bizarre gig I was ever at was as a result of this bizarre journey that Air put me on, right? So I got into Spaceman 3, and one of the guys, obviously, that Kevin bangs on about, and quite rightly so, is Jason Pearce, who went on to form Spiritualised.
Yeah.
And everything that he ever did was just genius. But one of the other guys went on to form Sonic Boom. That was the name. So you can think Street Fighter 2 Sonic Boom, right? And he did a gig, in the secret bunker in St Andrews. The hidden secret bunker that's on road signs, so it's not that big a secret, right? Have you ever been, no? Secret bunker in St Andrews in Fife, and you go there and it's obviously underground. He did a gig in there. Wow. It was like the meth lab in Breaking Bad, the underground meth lab that was underneath the laundry. And I went down there, the laundrette, to watch this gig, and it was the most bizarre but spectacular gig I've ever been to.
Wow.
So there you go. That was my kind of Air Moon Safari experience. But even now when I hear that album, tremendous.
Takes you
coffee table album, mate.
At the time it came out.
I did, which actually came out in 98, but it was still in the charts by the time February 99 came around, you know, it was still in there. And it was just phenomenal. Superb album.
Were they getting much radio play, or how is it? Because obviously it's important to think, you need to remember at that point in time, you weren't just... I used to bump, honest truth, and I've said this for the reason I've got Northern Soul tattooed in my arm because I thought it was cool when I got it, right? And but the honest truth is, I got into Northern Soul via a KFC advert. I heard that. I heard something. I need to find out what that song is. That's amazing. I liked it that much. And there's more easy ways now to find out about music. The majority of the time, I find it's when your mate shares it on a social media platform or tags you in it or sends you on WhatsApp and goes, "Just heard this, mate. You're going to love that." Fair enough. But then it was more. Was it the radio they were on?
They would have been, but there was also at that time, and this is bizarre because obviously MTV had its heyday, right? Yeah. And we all remember them turning it.
The box now, the box.
Well, MTV launched, and I don't even know if the channel still exists, but they launched like a sister channel, and it was called M2, and it was all the kind of more indie, left field, alternative music. And Air got loads of airplay on M2. Right? M2.
Wasn't VH2?
There was also a VH2. There was also a VH2.
Very much that cut for that cloth as well. VH2 was brilliant.
It was more alternative, and you got into bands like Air through these channels. But also the guy that I had that psychedelic conversation with, where we basically spoke about BBC propaganda, inventing countries to get our money for charity. Sure. He was into electronic music, and he used to buy a magazine called Jockey Slut. And it was a monthly magazine, and it would introduce you to bands like... I know, Jockey Slut. It was like disc jockey, DJ Slut kind of thing, if you're a jockey slut. And it was like Air and the Beta Band and all these, Death in Vegas and all these bands that ordinarily you might not have known about, but they were introducing you. And every month there was a magazine mounted disc of tracks. So that was also a way that bands were being introduced to you through cover-mounted cassettes and CDs, mate, like you said with your Golden Grahams.
No, that's what it was like. I mean, I remember as well, my mum and dad, I don't know if they were like new, well, they were new to CDs, and I don't know if someone just convinced them this is what you did, but it was this company called Britannia, right? Aye.
I'll rip off, man.
Spitting in the catalogue before he opens it and that. But it was like, they just sold all the up-to-date albums that you could get them delivered to your door, and you did it like a once-a-month subscription. You would get like one CD free, and then if you wanted more, you maybe get them discounted compilation ones and all that. So they would get like 3-4 CDs a month. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So whatever they'd had the month before, I'd be like, right, well, I'll have that, see you later, and take it up to my room and just give it a blast. Do you know what I mean? The top 40 rock anthems of all time.
There was always a compilation because they had you over a barrel, mate, because the Britannia Club, you had to purchase a CD every month, right?
Yes.
And it was proper.
Right.
So they used to like advertise in all the magazines. So it was like, you get 10 CDs for 99 pence. And you thought, wow. But you were signing your life over, man. So they got all your money back because every CD you bought thereafter was at least $14.99. And if you didn't actually select one, they sent you one, right? And it was always like the top 40 air guitar classics with fucking Van Halen and all this rubbish on it. And that was the biggest crooked system ever, because that big box would come through your door, that big cardboard box, and it would be like 40 of the worst air guitar rock songs, man. Every month, volume 17. Oh, Britannia.
It's not like you can go online and unsubscribe then, mate. You know
I know. You had to write them letters. It was like the Reader's Digest, man. You couldn't get rid of them.
Brilliant.
Our house was the same, right? So there was always a book that dropped through the letterbox and a CD, and both of them were rotten. So even if you still go round to my mum's house, right, there's a bookshelf where like 300 volumes of dross, and it was all the Reader's Digest stuff, and then the Britannia shelf, and it was all the worst bands in the history of music, because nobody could be bothered selecting a CD. Terrible.
That's right. That is
and
exactly
totally worthless. All these years later, totally worthless.
Yep, I remember it so well. That is exactly
such a scam, mate. Such a scam.
But one of the good CDs that must have came from then, because I think that was the only CDs got was George Michael, Ladies and Gentlemen, the best of, and that is the CD I'm covering now. Everyone just calm down.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've already said that. I like that. No.
George Michael has been a hero of mine latterly in my life. I would say the last sort of 6 years or so, 7 years. Again, I've said this sort of before on Screamacelica, I was the best. I had the best music weapon you could ever dream of having. That was a jukebox, because you cannot predict who next puts a pound in it. So you are, and you've got no choice but to let them play it, even if it's terrible. Do you know what I mean? But like the amount of genres you're then accessing to, and because it's your jukebox, I had speakers like wee box ones over the bar. I had like bigger ones in the far corner. The sound system in the pub was awesome, right? So any song was kind of getting elevated to sounding a wee bit better than it was anyway. Do you know what I mean? Well, what I would say is each song was getting a fairer crack of the whip because of the quality it was, you know, the audio.
And the ambience, mate, the ambience of the bar, you know, so you're in an environment where it sounds good as well, eh?
Totally. So it was like George Michael's getting played by this guy called Jukebox Andy, funnily enough. I don't think it was his real first name, but you never know. He did play it a lot. But he'd put on George Michael, and there was this song called Star People 97, and give it a chance. There's a fantastic, the best version of it is on MTV Unplugged,
right,
which I have spoke with JP Mason at length about, is potentially the best MTV Unplugged of all time. And Star People has lyrics that are more poignant probably today than ever. But basically the crux of the matter is George Michael was big because George Michael was good. And then his attitude is that everyone else is just there because they've got a wee sob story about their mum never used to love them and their daddy left them when they were young. He's like, everyone's on Parkinson basically with a sob story. And he says, is that what makes a star? Counting the money until your soul turns green. I'm like, that's just good. I also like, obviously, I think there was another song which I didn't actually know about when I was having this wee sort of listening to a lot more of his pop numbers. And then I watched a documentary on his life, which was funnily enough getting made, not knowing he was going to die. It was just getting made about him. And obviously, I'm heavily influenced by Liam Gallagher and all that stuff. And he features in it with a couple of stories about George Michael. The first one being, I remember I moved into the same street as him. He was in the first day I moved. The biggest bouquet of flowers you've ever seen in your life came. Welcome to the neighbourhood, lots of love, George. Because that's how to play Liam Gallagher. His own. He didn't know what to do with it. And then they spoke about a song called "Praying for Time," which I again had never heard in my life. And it was getting, basically they were saying that could be a John Lennon song, it's that good. Do you know what I mean? He's just a better singer as well. It is outstanding. I recommend it to anyone. And then I like his more upbeat numbers as well, the more pop ones, if you want to call them that. Doesn't bother me. I'm all for that. Fast love, all good. You know, my friends have got their ladies. They're all having babies. But I just want to have some fun. I love that. Nothing wrong with that. And I think in a world where we are looking for equality and all that, and we want to be very much, don't judge anyone for their sexuality or anything like that. If you actually look back what happened with George Michael when he was exposed as being gay by being set up by an American copper to go up to him because they had a hunch he might be and offer him whatever it is they offered him in the toilet to catch him out, make his mugshot look everyone. His whole family now find out that that's how he's gay by doing it that way. And then you get Michael Parkinson, I think it was, asking him, are you ashamed that that's how you came out? You don't wish you'd told me. He goes, that's right, Michael. I forgot I had to tell the BBC that I was gay. Do you know what I mean? Get away. Do you know what?
That's interesting.
He said, see what I did in those toilets? Okay, I'm a wee bit silly because it was a setup. He goes, but what I was offered, you don't do it. That's what he said.
See the thing, right? That's interesting that you mentioned that interview because not as research, but because I watch a lot of interviews. And I've recently watched that interview that you're talking about. And he's very open about it, isn't he? And he's like, he's
not apologetic, put it that way.
He's poking fun at himself. And I just think, see, when you're growing up as well, right, there's certain, when I was younger, and I think this has probably changed as well because there's not as many musical icons as there were back in the day. So I was lucky that my mum and dad had very good music taste, right?
Cool.
And so the records that were being played in my house were I didn't realise at the time, but it was good music. So when you're listening to Bowie and you're listening to all these the Beatles and all this kind of stuff, it's later on that you think, wow, I appreciate the fact that my folks were into good music.
Yeah.
But the kind of superstars of the time, the topical superstars of the time were Madonna, Prince, Michael Jackson and George Michael. And George Michael, I remember him as far back. And Adam and the Ants earlier on, but he disappeared.
Yeah.
Adam Ant disappeared. But I remember George Michael with Wham. So these figures were like omnipresent. And you probably took them for granted a wee bit because it was all you thought kind of pop music and all the rest of it. But then as you get a wee bit older, Russell, right, and you actually take Michael Jackson out of the equation for obvious reasons, right, but you look at Prince, you look at the quality of what Prince's output, unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
And you look back at his performance, and not just as a singer, as a guitarist, unbelievable musicianship, unbelievable dancer, unbelievable entertainer. Madonna, I really realised kind of later on in my life just how incredibly varied her musical back catalogue was, to the point where in the year 2000 I went down to Earl's Court to watch her live, and it was my intention. I watched Madonna.
Good.
Unbelievable. The person who was on guitar, going back to my wee Air, Moon Safari, Royksop, Deaf in Vegas vibe, was Jack LeConte, right? Jack LeConte of Les Rhythm Digitalis, right?
You're going to get banned for this show soon.
I'm telling you, that was his name, right? And he was on guitar for Madonna. It was at Earl's Court.
Wow.
In 2000, flew down to see Madonna. And, I would have done the same with Prince. I would have done the same with George Michael, because there's as you get a wee bit older and a wee bit more mature, you then actually start listening to what you're hearing, Russell, rather than it's all just pop and bubblegum and all the rest of it. When you get older, you listen to the tunes. And I just look at him, what a talent. I mean, what a voice George Michael had. You just got to watch his performances with Queen.
Yep.
Which I'm sure you've watched many, many, many times. The vocal range was unbelievable.
He's the only one to sing in the same key as Freddie Mercury.
Incredible.
All those acts. He was the only one.
And great hair, mate.
Aye. Oh, aye.
A great fosh.
I remember as well, I mean, like, there was also, like, when he was exposed, whatever you want to call it, as being gay, what does he do? He comes out dressed as the American policeman who lifted him. He has
great video
turning into disco balls.
Brilliant.
And you're going, you're going. That is rock and roll to me, if you know. And that is what it's all about. It's two fingers to the establishment. It's just
brilliant. And
brilliant.
By the way, this is the thing as well. I've never seen a cop looking that sharp. You know what I mean? Because with the short sleeves and the shades and all that. Nah, I didn't see that in Fife.
And I think you look back at his earlier stuff as well, you'll get Careless Whisper, the guilty feet have got no rhythm. He was writing that at 16.
Mad.
Like, who's coming up with lyrics like that at that age? It's mind-boggling. And then the faith stuff. And then again, another man, one of the reasons I like him, a very principled man. tied up in a contract with Sony, who were completely ripping the mick out of it and wanting albums churned out every 6 months off him. And he basically is that principle. He went, took it to court and lost, and then just goes, sound, when does the contract end? Oh, not till like 1996. This was only 91 or something. He goes, cool, see you then. And they're like, what? He did not release music for 6 years in his peak years. And that's how, well, I don't mind the man with principles though sometimes. He goes, there's no way you're making one more penny off me. And if I want to do what I love, you make money off it still. So no, I'll just wait till that's gone.
Yeah, it's like, going back to Prince, obviously I think it was Warner Brothers that he was in dispute with, Slave on the Face. George Michael done the video, and instead of Sony, it was phony and all this kind of stuff. So they were putting the messages out there. But again, we've already mentioned charity work, unbelievable work, hidden work, anonymous work for charities throughout his life as well. So
£10 million they reckon he'd donated. Yeah. And then, obviously, to top it all off, he turned down Simon Cowell for X Factor. They reckon every year that Popeye on X Factor's been on, he's been phoned, and he said no every single time. Because that's the whole point. He's going, why would I be on something like that? Why would I be on something like that? They're rubbish.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, you're right. I mean, I think sometimes people, when you talk about somebody called Les Rhythm Digitalis, and the lead guy is called Jack LeConte, people think you're just name dropping to sound as though you've got a quirky taste in music. And in a way, I think a lot of people do that, Russell, because they're too cool for school. But I was so deep into my alternative tunes back then, I was listening to all that kind of stuff. But then you've also got to have an appreciation for good music, and it doesn't matter, like I said at the top of the show, it doesn't matter what type of music that is, what genre that music is. George Michael was just a classic songwriter with a tremendous voice, and he was a great entertainer.
Perfect. We will wrap it up there. That was quality, Paul. I enjoyed that. Remember,
you asked me back
the
on.
subscribe button. Somewhere like that, anyway. Hopefully Kev Graham will be back next week for Screamacelica and doesn't put me in the boss's chair ever again, you know what I mean? Big thanks to Paul John Dykes for coming on, and we'll see you all next week.